While I made a video about this tutorial is brought to you by Saki GT, who had a great write-up on S2KI. Lists a number of things that you need to complete the job on the list above here: 5mm Allen key, socket, spark plug socket, new spark plugs, what you can choose, how to gap them, and some great tips and tricks. So highly recommend going to S2KI to check that out. I'll have a link in the description on that. To start off, let's grab the 5mm Allen. It's the orange one in this case. Important here too, as you're trying to loosen up these little bolts on top of the cover, is to kind of snap them loose as opposed to kind of force them and turn them so that you don't accidentally strip any sort of the thread. So here I am just getting rid of these 4 bolts. Again, 5mm hex, and I like these wrenches because they have a nice other end that makes it so I don't have to be so straight up and down when removing them. And so go through, remove these one at a time, put them in a safe place. And here's if it snap. There we go. You can see it kind of snaps there. That way I don't strip the thread when pulling them out. And removing the last one here, and about to remove that cover. It's a great time once you remove that cover to maybe give it a little bit of a wash and clean it up a little bit. And as I remove this, I notice that these are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know if this is a factory thing or could have been the previous owner that labeled these. Next, let's grab a 10mm. Like everything these days, it's 10mm. I always use a 6-sided. It's just going to be better and not strip. Again, we want to focus on forcing them loose, and we're going to undo these. And again, we've got 4 of these. These remove the ignition coil bolts, and we want to also make sure everything's pretty clean so nothing falls in where the spark plugs go. So let's give it a quick vacuum. You can use air to spray it loose. And here, a little tip and trick is if you lift these up and you give it a pinch, you want to kind of snap it like you would to like a carrot, and it's going to help it break free. So we're going to do that on all 4 of these, kind of get everything ready to go. So when we actually start working on the spark plugs, we can do each spark plug one at a time, but since I was kind of getting into a rhythm here, I decided let's just grab each of these plugs for the ignition coils and snap those loose. So let's pull cylinder number 1. Coil looks pretty good, and we're going to set that to the side. Next, we're going to pull our spark plug socket out. We're going to force it down. It's got a little bit of a rubber inside of it, so it's going to hold the spark plug once you loosen it up. But again, you want to give it a good little pop so it kind of cracks loose, and you don't just kind of muscle and force it and accidentally strip a spark plug. You do not want that to happen inside the engine. Really didn't have any issues. Again, I've got about 40,000 miles on my S2000, and so I wasn't probably too worried. I don't know when the spark plugs were changed last, but I haven't done it, and I bought the car in 2012. So they had about at least 12,000 miles or so. But overall condition, that looks kind of like a normal one. Decided to check the gap with this gap tool. So check 0.4 and 0.4 fit through. Then when I actually go to check 0.44, you'll notice it doesn't go through. So spark plug seems to be in good shape. As far as the gap's concerned, these are Denso plugs. I'm replacing them with NGK. And then here you do want to be a little more careful. It's really hard for me to kind of line up showing you how I'm doing it and make sure I'm still in the frame. But eventually check it, and they are within spec between 0.4 and 0.44 on the feeler gauge there. So we're going to slide the spark plug in, and again, we're doing 1 cylinder at a time here to just keep track, make sure we do everything we need to do. Slide that in, and once you slide it in, a good tip here is actually to turn it to the left so that it seats properly, and then start turning it to the right, because you don't want to have it cross-threaded as you're bringing that in. So tighten it up by hand, and then you can use a torque wrench to torque it properly. I didn't have one that went that low, so I just kind of did a Fix thing here, which is just about an eighth or so of a turn. So I kind of did that like it's maybe a 1/16 of a turn 2 times to get that 1/8 and kind of lock it in there as it should. Now that we've got the ignition coil off, we're going to put some dielectric grease inside each coil. It'll help it go over the spark plug nicely and maintain a really good connection over time. So I highly recommend do that. As you're lowering that down, clip the plug back into place and move the wire so you can get that ignition coil into place. Once you've done that, you can then go grab your 10mm bolt and hand thread that in. And then grab your ratchet. I have a 3/8 ratchet with a 10mm and tighten it up. Again, focusing on let's do one cylinder at a time and get through that, and then we can just repeat the process on 2, 3, and 4. This is the first time I've done spark plugs on the S2000. I've done spark plugs on other vehicles, but a couple things I didn't do before, again, just as a newbie, was I didn't actually check the gap before on those other cars. I don't own those cars today, so maybe that's okay. Yeah, I probably should have done that. Also, dielectric grease. I haven't owned dielectric grease prior to this. Good thing to have, especially for brakes. I think I should probably do that. A little tune-up on the brakes to make sure that they are running smoothly as they should. So finishing up cylinder number 2 and then pulling out number 3. Number 3 looks good. Again, maybe a little bit of oil on that ignition coil there, but loosen up the spark plug, pull it out, do the same check. When looking through everything, the gaps were fine on all the plugs. All the plugs seem to be, in okay shape. Of course, definitely used. Although I don't know what the difference between a plug that has 100 miles on it versus a plug that has 10,000 miles or 30,000 miles has on it. But the car seemed to be running okay. There was a tick, 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 tick. It'll be curious to see if that sound goes away. I have not driven this yet since installing the spark plugs. You'll see a little bit later on I do a little startup of the vehicle. And again, here's my general setup, and again, loosening up the spark plug, give it a nice pop to pull it out, and immediately check the gap on that, check the gap on the new spark plug. All the new spark plugs came within spec. Some people will say to, at the auto store, check the spark plugs before you buy them so you don't have to gap them. But again, they were all within spec. They do say to be careful with the NGK plugs that I have when checking the gap, and actually use the tool that I have versus another tool, because you don't want to hurt that tip and ruin any sort of spark that you, of course, need. So again, some more dielectric grease in the ignition coil, slide that into place, and put your last bolt in and tighten that thing up. And then the moment of truth, where you're like, hey, what's going to happen? Is this going to start? So let's see here. Starts up just fine. Nice, loud, I guess, exhaust. Then it was all clear, and then some essentially smoke precipitation, could be water vapors just in the exhaust heating up, and so exiting. It wasn't really like a smoky thing, but car started up, it runs fine. And probably the next thing on the car here will be adjusting that exhaust, because right now the exhaust, when the car's running, it actually hits the bottom of the vehicle. So I cleaned up the cover with a little bit of tissue paper. As you can see, it's still a little bit stuck on there, but toss on some new bolts, get that into place, and we are good to go.
So dark is rich, white is lean. This is probably more on the rich side. This is number 1. So number 1, rich. These are Denso plugs. They were gapped correctly though. Spark plug number 2 seems to be also on the rich side. Plug number 3 on the very rich side, actually. It'd be interesting to compare. There we go. So 2, 3. I think, yeah, 3 is much darker than 2. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, looks like 1 and 2 were leaner, closer to where it should be, and 3 and 4 are rich. I wonder how much is this because of the Han data that I had with the test pipe and kind of messing with the tune a little bit. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at. So let's throw these puppies away, and the new one should do us pretty well.
Next. Here he is, chaps.